So welcome everyone to Healthy Platonic Relationships. So good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My name is Amin, and I am the placement student at CICMH. I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement, and then we will go into some housekeeping rules. So I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently living, working, studying on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga of the Credit First Nation in what is known as Toronto. I would like to also recognize that I'm actually born and raised on the unceded land of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. I am grateful to live, learn, and work on these lands and commit to respecting their histories and their communities. So some housekeeping rules is that closed captioning is at the bottom of the screen. The chat function will be open for discussing thoughts and reactions. We encourage everyone to submit their questions in the Q&A box. We will save the last 10 to 15 minutes of our webinar for questions and comments. The recordings will also be available on our website by the end of today or by early tomorrow morning. With that being said, I would like to introduce our guest speaker who will be presenting. Her name is Emma Connor, and like I said, she works for Durham Rape Crisis Center.
Well, hello, folks, and good lunch hour. I hope you are all feeling well and enjoying what little sunshine maybe we had today. I am Emma Connor, and I am excited today to talk about healthy platonic relationships. I actually looked up the word platonic because I knew what it meant, but I couldn't articulate a definition that was well enough, so I'm excited to talk about that. Just a little bit about me. I'm not going to read my bio, but I've been working in the nonprofit field for 15 years now. And most of that work has been doing feminist work. A lot of the work has been with women and girls, especially in the last 6 years. I've been working in gender-based violence at the Durham Rape Crisis Center. So we have a long history. We've been doing this work for over 50 years. And one of my primary roles is to manage our crisis line. And that was actually the first iteration of service that we had. And it was funded through a group of women who decided to use their baby bonuses 50 years ago because there were no services for survivors of sexual violence in our community. So, yeah. What does platonic mean? Platonic is actually an intimate and affectionate, but not sexual relationship. So it is really the truest definition of friendship when you think about it. It does mean that it's close, that it involves a connection. And I'm gonna play this TikTok because I think this, first of all, I love TikTok. It was a habit I picked up during the pandemic, and I think it's just a great way to share stories. So I'm going to let this wonderful woman talk about how she thinks of friendship.
My theory of love is kind of maybe outside the traditional meaning. I think love is platonic, and I think romance is separate. I'm prioritizing authentic love and loving my friends, my family, the people around me. I'm not prioritizing romance right now. I find that my romantic experiences aren't ones that I can look back on like fondly. Usually when you're done with a relationship, you actually try and forget it. Why would I want to keep putting effort into memories that I'm eventually going to want to forget when I can just pour all my love into my family, my friends, and I'll always look back at those memories as like, wow, that was just an amazing time. I want to be able to look back at my life with as much fondness as possible. That's like to me, what love is.
Which I think is just a really brilliant, beautiful way of looking at the importance of platonic relationships, friendships that are loving and intimate and close. And I think for students, especially today, who are coming to university and have been educated in high school during the pandemic, or entered into high school during that time when there was huge feelings of disconnect. And high school is one of the first times where you're open to like a larger population of people and get to meet more people who might be like you. So if that's been changed or that's been altered, that's going to have a significant impact in the way that, we socialize, and the way that we get to know each other, and the way that we can form these intimate relationships that are not sexual. Sometimes we think of the word intimate as synonymous with sexual, and that is absolutely not the case. We need to be part of what I like to do when I give a presentation or when I talk about things is to encourage articulation, deliberation. We are talking deliberately about things that we sometimes take for granted and just let happen organically. So if we can be determined and we can be mindful, then we'll be able to have better relationships in general. I don't know. Oh, sorry, folks. My icons are always in the way. So I thought about it, and the top 3 ways I think to be in a healthy friendship. The first way is to be interested and to be interesting, aka express yourself. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these. The second way is be caring and be open to receiving care. And then the third one is setting boundaries and receiving boundaries around needs and expectations. So interest, care, and boundaries are ways that we can help foster students healthy friendships. And we're going to talk about red flags and green flags in a little bit, but I like to set the foundation with some skills or some aspects. So share interests can feel scary. Sometimes you're worried you're going to feel judged, that maybe it's not going to resonate with someone. But I think there's a fraction of a second where you have to be brave and you have to say, I was in a training last night, and one of our participants said that she really liked Disney. She's a university student herself, and was like talking about how in a classroom they were bashing Disney and hate, all of this kind of stuff. And she's like, I really like it. And that took a second of her to be brave as an adult young woman and say that she still found interest and like in Disney, even though it's a lot of, girls in dresses. She still liked it. And I thought that that was really brave of her to put herself out there and to share what her interests are. And, whether we can directly say, this is a great way to make a friend and talk about what your interests are, or we can role model that for them. If we're in a position where we are talking to students or we're talking to a group of people, being brave enough to say, that I really like romance fiction. I have not read a literary book in years. Beyond scholarly articles and things like that, I read romance. It helps my brain turn off. It helps my brain fantasy. Um, and being able to share that and be open and honest is just a way where you're going to create, more authentic relationships, more enthusiasm for your friendships. My friend and I last night, we were talking about pie because tomorrow is National Pie Day. So if you are in the mood for pie, I encourage you to grab some tomorrow. Now, this might seem like an obvious or redundant be a friend, but what does that mean? One of the articles that I read that I'm going to mention later was talking about companionship as one of the primary functions of friendship. And I think to be a companion, you have to be caring. Care about yourself and then care about them. And in that way, it forms that kind of positive feedback loop, right? It allows you to keep friends because you're caring about them, they're caring about you, you're caring about yourself, they're caring about themselves. And empathy, consideration, and compassion, I think, are some of the key ways that you can practice caring. Respect is another one. Humor, I think, is another way to be caring, to foster that kind of sense of um, care, because care is also an investment, investing in that other person, investing time, energy, effort, from a practical functional sense. But then it's also, really, really about the social skill tools that we're giving or the values that we're practicing. Compassion is a big value of mine. Consideration and to be considered, is, I think, an underrated quality of all relationships. Has someone considered me before making a decision? If we're in a really close relationship, if we're in a friendship, or if we're in a romantic relationship. What are boundaries? I think boundaries is one of those pop culture words that's really kind of taken hold in our field in social work and talking about setting healthy boundaries, especially for good mental health and healthy relationships. So, what are they? How do we make them? Um, this TikTok is actually from the Queer Collective podcast, which is based in Toronto. And they're talking about boundaries within the scope of romantic relationships and ethical non-monogamy. But I think they do a really brilliant way of outlining what boundaries are and how, we can take this knowledge and apply it to any good relationship, even professional relationships, but especially, our intimate ones. So I am going to let them speak.
How are you able to set a healthy boundary without making your partner feel like they're being controlled?
Inherently, a boundary doesn't aim to control. So a rule is a restriction that you place on somebody else. A boundary is a restriction that you place on yourself. You are not allowed to have this drink, okay? Rule, because I don't want you to drink alcohol. Rule.
Okay.
Boundary is I will not be around you. I will remove myself when there's alcohol involved. So there are rules, boundaries, and agreements. I think if you're curious about like this thing that I'm thinking of, is it a rule or a boundary? You ask yourself, am I imposing a limit on someone else? Am I making a request? Am I speaking about my own experience and my own feelings as a way to communicate my discomfort or, whatever it is that you're trying to communicate? Yeah, drink away, babe. Drink away.
You're like, the restriction made me feel like I needed it.
Wow, reverse psychology works well on me.
So I think that that's a really brilliant way of understanding boundaries. Are we placing a rule on someone else or are we expressing a limit that's for ourselves? Another kind of quick way that I think about it when I communicate boundaries, and again, we're being deliberate, we're being articulate in the things that we need or the ways that we want to have relationships or friendships, is that I do not like being yelled at. I will not accept being yelled at. So if yelling happens, I am going to remove myself from this situation. So I can't control you. I can't control if you're going to yell. But if that happens, my body, my sense, I shut down. I shut down. I can't engage anymore. So I know that for me, I need to remove myself from the situation so that I can, hopefully engage in better communication in the future. So yelling, I think, is a really quick, easy way to understand limits and boundaries and how to make them and how to honor them. I love this little icon, this little drawing from I cannot read the quote or the thing at the bottom, but the quote is, boundaries are the distance which I can love you and myself simultaneously. And I think that that is extremely beautiful because sometimes we think of a boundary and like, oh, they're putting walls up or, oh, I'm sure there's tons of people who don't want to respect another's boundaries because now they have to see how their actions can impact somebody else. But when we talk about them and when we look at it from the lens of love and care and that compassion, we can see just how important it is to give and to receive. When I was doing this presentation, I was actually consulting with one of our amazing counselors, Isabella Juga, who works with post-secondary students at Durham. I mean, she's been working with post-secondary students for years, but currently right now she's working with Trent Durham. And she gave an example about, well, what if you're invited to a party and you don't really want to go? Like, where do you find that balance of being a friend because your friend wants to go to this party and they want you to come, but then also honoring, your inner um wanting to miss out and wanting to have, your alone time, it's the opposite of FOMO. It's called JOMO. It's the joy of missing out. And she said, sometimes we need to be able to communicate external boundaries. So a boundary that, we're sharing with others about the way that we engage with them or the way that we engage with our shared environment or space. And then we also need to recognize some internal boundaries, boundaries around how do I keep myself safe? How do I nourish myself? How do I, honor the things that I need for myself? And so she gave the example of, being invited to a party you don't really want to go to. And maybe it's establishing the expectation with your friend that, what, I'm gonna go to the party with you for like a couple hours, but then I'm gonna peace out and like go home and honor my need for like my comfy bed by like 11 p.m. And giving yourself those kind of clear communication, but then also honoring the boundary that like, I don't want to be drunk tomorrow. Like I don't want to be out all night because that doesn't make me feel good in the moment and it doesn't make me feel good tomorrow. So setting them and honoring them again goes with that theme of being articulate and deliberate. So if we talk about the first three things as aspects of healthy friendships, the best tool, the absolute best tool is communication. So how do we then use those aspects? How do we get to those aspects? How do we practice them? How do we share them? Is through communication, which can seem very simple. We are in an age of over communication sometimes, but what are we really saying? How are we really being heard? And then how are we being understood? Communication is on its most top tier level of understanding. It's an exchange of information. Whether it is emotional information, whether it's a boundary, whether it's an interest, it's just an exchange. And it should always be that exchange and not just like plopping it on someone else. It should be a back and forth. And so one of the best tools, and I talk about this in my training for our crisis line so much, and it might be one of those things that you feel like you're being inundated with, but it's active listening. And active listening is more than just listening to listen. It is about considerate ways of reflecting on what the other person says so that you can understand and they can be understood. We're never going to be fully able to step into another person's shoes and, walk their walk. But with consideration, with reflection, with compassion, empathy, all of those really great skills, values, we're going to be able to get as close as we can to understanding their perspectives. And active listening is the best tool of communication to do that. The tool of the tool. So building friendships on campuses. Bella and I, when we were talking about this side specifically, she's like, do challenges first. So, which is very much me. I like to focus on the challenge and then or the negative, and then I like to end with the positive. So some of the challenges that folks feel when trying to build new friendships on campus, they're not staying connected with campus life. So they don't know what's going on, or they're not paying attention, or they don't know how to get involved. They have mental health challenges already and struggles already, some that they might not have had the opportunity to get support for. And some, even with support, are extremely still challenging, right? If anybody in the room has experienced anxiety, sure, you can take some medication, but that doesn't mean the way that your brain processes or the way that your brain anticipates anxiety goes away, right? There's lots of things that can still impact a mental health, stress, even with support and um, medications or anything like that. Language barriers or lack of communication skills. Sometimes I wonder about the communication skills of folks and how we are not prioritizing conversation. Because in an era of, texting and social media, I sound like an ancient person. I swear I am not, I'm not that old. But it's important to be able to have those skills and those tools, and you really only get better at it through experience. You can't just read about it. You have to actually talk to people. Financial pressures. This was a big one that Bella shared because she sees it on campus all the time, the financial pressures of being a student, and whether or not you can work and, get the grades that you want at the same time, or, whether it's not an option. And so, how do you find that balance? How do you find that priority? And then social media expectations. I just put this on there because I think social media creates expectations around friendships, around what campus life should be, and it's not always accurate. It is oftentimes a fallacy. It is, not showing people on their worst days, and it's often not even showing accurate representations of people on their best days either, because with editing and, soundtracks and all of that kind of stuff, it can sometimes divorce folks from authentic representations. And the authenticity is where it's at. Being genuine, feeling yourself is so where it's at. And then I think one of the transitions between challenges and how to is recognizing where your comfort zone is. When you recognize where your comfort zone is, then you have the options or the choices to stay in or step out. And it should always be a choice. No one should be pushing you outside your comfort zone unless they love you a whole lot and they know maybe you need a little push, like me. But, most of the time it should be choices. It should be choices about when you feel safe enough, when you feel welcome enough, when you want to be brave, when you want to take a risk. Healthy risks are so important. They teach us resiliency. They teach us grittiness, to be able to overcome disappointment or rejection or, all of those negative or challenging experiences that can happen from just engaging. So then how do we then combat these challenges? So get to know what's happening around campus. I think back now to my first foray into university life, and I was just so terrified. I didn't know what to do. I was the first person in my family to go to university. Everybody else, they were, blue collar, they worked for the city. Um, so for me to go to university, I didn't have role models in my family. And so I thought I was doing real good just getting to and from class. And I would memorize like my path in my head, like how I had to walk from my dorm, what the quickest way was, what did I need to pack for the days that I didn't, need to make unnecessary trips. But I put a lot of pressure on myself just to do that. And then, just rest the rest of the time or study or, see my friends. But I wish that I had felt more free to engage with campus life, to be able to like go to more random events. I went to Trent University in Peterborough, and there were things like the Kaylee, and there were events and all of that kind of stuff. And I really wish I had taken more opportunity. And I think, sharing with students things that you like going to, sharing with peers, other events that might be happening or things that you enjoy around campus is so, so important. Again, role modeling is the very beginning almost towards mentorship, and it really doesn't, cost any energy beyond just being yourself and being open. Connecting with campus resources. So this was one that Bella really kind of stressed. And whether or not you think that you need accessibility services, even just knowing where these centers are, knowing what's available will be, shaking the hand with someone who works there kind of thing will be an asset to folks in their life, because they're going to do things and they're going to connect to other um, resources at the university. Maybe it's a career center, maybe it's a guest, a huge guest speaker coming, who knows? They're going to have the skills and the knowledge to be able to make really good connections for you. Go to the connectors, it'll save you time. Getting involved, and by that I mean like exploring, risk getting lost. We all have cell phones now. So, if you get a little bit lost, you're never really that lost. You're just a phone call away from somebody or a text away from somebody. Drop your pin and then go on a wander, whether it's on campus or through, your local town, and invite someone to go with you. Or, you find a uh, a pub that maybe is down a street you've never been down before. And I think, that aspect of freedom and that aspect of giving yourself permission to just have no expectations can also be really freeing and take some of the pressure off of building friendships. Like, just go wander, see who you meet, see what you find. And then I think also there's an importance on trying one-on-one activities, but also then being brave enough to try a group activity, or vice versa, depending on your preference. For me, I love one-on-one because I love deep conversations. I don't know if that's come across or not, but deep conversations is where it's at. So sometimes with group activities, it's too noisy, it's too loud, and then I feel kind of like, okay, like where do I chime in, or how do I interject into the conversation? But there is something about the vibe of a group, the energy of a group, whether it is, laughter or humor or just experiencing something new together. I think one of the most profound group experiences that I don't even think you can call a group, but was um one of the last concerts of the Tragically Hip. I was at the Sky Dome, and my best friend and I were there, and there were grown men crying beside me, on the other side of me, behind me during some of Gord's last songs. And I think, I could have said, oh, no, I don't want to go to a huge concert venue and like so many people and blah, blah, blah. But it was such a profound and wonderful experience. And I think being open to that is really, really, really important. So some of the red flags, I just want to do a time check. Okay. Red flags in a friendship. They only reach out when they need something. This is, one-sided. You feel judged after talking or hanging out with them. And that can sometimes you don't even really know that it's happening until afterwards. And then you're like, I don't feel so good. They only talk about themselves. Um, they stress or trauma dump on you without asking if you have the space for it. I think that there are absolutely friendships out there where, you know, sharing stresses, sharing shared experiences of trauma are important. However, sometimes we don't have the space for it. And part of, respecting and caring for yourself and for your friend is asking. With my best friend since we were 14 years old, we do this. And sometimes we won't be as kind about it. Be like, listen, I need to vent. Like, do you have time right now? And sometimes, it'll be a late night trip over to her house, or it'll just be on the phone. But it is so important to be able to say, yes, I have the time for you, or no, I don't. Like it's gotta wait. It's gotta wait until tomorrow. I have this huge project done, unless you need me, unless it's a 10 out of a 10 need. And when my father died a few years ago, it was a 10 out of 10 need. One of my dearest friends is a lawyer, and she kind of gave everything over to her team and said I needed to go. And so she came and was with me and my family when my dad unexpectedly passed away. So, you know, being able to have space again is a really important boundary. They always tried to make it sexual. That's just, I mean, given the work that I do at the DRCC, the huge red flag, not okay. Absolutely not. That's someone who wanted a romantic relationship, not a friendship. And I'm gonna talk about the friend zone at the end because I have a huge, huge peeve for it. It is not a pet peeve. It is a full-on peeve. I don't like the term. And then they gaslight you and dismiss your feelings. So gaslighting is at its core a denial of your own experience, right? So you're telling them that this is how you experience something, and they're saying, nope, that's not true. They're just dismissing your feelings altogether. They're making you doubt yourself. That is not kind, not okay. And we see this a lot in some of the early toxic and abusive relationships out there. So then what are green flags? Again, because I like to paint the challenge and then lead towards something positive. They support you and celebrate your wins. There is something so amazing and wonderful when you have someone who is as excited for your accomplishments as you feel. I mean, it's a very beautiful, wonderful feeling. I talk about enthusiasm a lot, and to have friends be present with you and join you in your joy and your enthusiasm, it's absolutely stupendous. It doesn't take anything from them, and it gives so much to you and the relationship. They listen to understand, so they're not waiting to just respond or share their story, which can sometimes be hard for neurodivergent folks, myself included. We relate a lot through sharing mutual stories as a way to share that we understand. But listening to understand them first and then sharing or then asking the question and then offering insight or idea or, asking for clarity is where it's at. Respecting your ideas and your thoughts, so not just taking a dump on them when you share, like actually entertaining the idea before like saying like absolutely not, we are not going camping in the snow. Some people do, more power to them, not for me. When there is equity in the relationship, so beyond just equality where everything's equal the whole time, equality doesn't really recognize that some people need different things. I might need more consideration for what kind of foods I can eat right now because, I'm not feeling so well. Whereas you might need more appreciation for sound because maybe, you're really sound sensitive or something like that. Who knows? I'm giving like, functional things when, there can absolutely be more um, untangible qualities that need to be shared, but still, they can apologize and admit when they're wrong. I think it's a really, really powerful skill that we don't talk enough about, being able to say, I was wrong, or I'm sorry. We need to do it more. We need to see it from our leaders more. We need to see it from people in positions of power and authority to admit that, they believed one thing, they got new information, and then they realized that they were wrong or they were in error or that they're going to change their mind. That is part of human growth and learning, and we need to be able to extend that to our friendships and platonic relationships. They can share openly about themselves, so they're not constantly afraid of being judged. And that's where, a bit of self-reflection comes in. How have I been treating them? What is the energy that I've been giving to them around how safe of a space or secure of a friendship or relationship that we have? And then being able to rely on each other and trust one another. Trust is something that builds over time. It builds through experience, right? It builds on it, understanding how you're going to be treated in the relationship. And that's why I put it at the very end, because trust will be built through all of these things. So, one of the studies that I read was actually a review of 38 other studies, because work smarter, not harder. And it was called The Science of Why Friendships Keep Us Healthy by Zara Abrams, and it was from 2023. And in that study, she found that for high quality friendships, they focus significantly on companionship and other social supports. So immediately when I thought of social supports, I thought of, taking a friend with you to do those tasks you don't really want to do. Maybe it's as simple as you hate grocery shopping and you want and want to go with a buddy, because at least then, you're not bored out of your mind or something like that. Um, or, if you have to go renew your license, you pick a day and you both go do it together or something like that. That kind of social support for the everyday things can be really, really great. But it shared that it significantly predicts well-being and can, and I think this is really important, protect against mental health issues like depression and anxiety. So high quality friendships that provide support and companionship protect against, adverse mental health issues. And they persist across the lifespan. I was actually on a crisis call the other night, and the person was talking about how, they only had 5 friends that they can call. They only have 5 friends that they can call if they are in need of, support or comfort or something like that. And I was like, that's amazing. That's amazing. You have 5 friends. You have 5 friends on your hand right now that that you can call and they will listen to you and be a comfort and support with you. I'd rather have 5 friends like that than a dozen friends who, only want to meet up for dinner and talk about pop culture or whatever it is. I want friends, I would rather have better quality relationships than more quantity any day. So the impact of platonic relationships on student life and mental health, and Bella helped me with this as well. So one of the key things is that it reduces isolation and loneliness. We have been hearing about this epidemic of loneliness. I first heard it when it came to men specifically, but it is happening across the world. An epidemic of loneliness happening since the pandemic, and it's important. It's absolutely um, something that we need to talk about, and talk about, the next point, sense of belonging and connection. How can we foster this? How can we foster a sense of community? Because yes, we can have these amazing like webinars and we can talk about it online, but it also feels different, or it should be complemented by things like going to meet your friend for coffee tomorrow, right? Talking about these ideas is great, and you can read an article and feel connected to, something in the newspaper, a story, but it feels different when your friend comes over and shares her new favorite donut with you. Feeling safer, friendships create a sense of safety and security. They can calm you down, and again, that's part of reducing isolation and feelings of loneliness. Sharing joys and celebrating accomplishments, building confidence and opening up new challenges, I think is also so important when you're with friends, because, they might be a person who's like big into geology, and their geology, I know, so random, but like maybe there's like an amethyst mind, and they're like, let's go. And you're like, I do not care about amethysts, but I care about my person. And so we are going to go and we're going to go mine some amethysts. And in that way, you might find a new love of digging in the dirt, of, looking for rocks. And you're also sharing in that person's joy, almost as if it's your own, right? When we accept these new challenges, experiences grow. We can explore new places and environments, which allows us to consider new perspectives and new ways of thinking, new ways to care about each other. And, I think one of the great things about student life is you have this tiny microcosm of so many different cultures and ideas and practices and way to be, um, all on campus, people from everywhere, especially in Canada. It's one of the best things about being Canadian is that we can explore and learn from each other, different family histories, different lessons that have been passed down from other generations that have maybe looked very different from our own. It's a huge blessing. And all of these things contribute really, really well to better mental health, which impacts how students are going to perform in the classroom, how they're going to experience things outside of the classroom. Um, yeah. Friendships and differences among, sorry guys, I'm going over. Friendships and differences around cultural values and culture shock. I think for a lot of international students or students who are traveling even to bigger cities from rural experiences or traveling provinces, there can be a sense of cultural shock. So it's always important to, come to it with a sense of cultural humility and recognizing that Canadians, in fact, do have culture, that we have a way of being. I was having a conversation with a coworker's boyfriend at our Christmas dinner, and he's from Ukraine. And he was saying, I asked him, I was like, what was your biggest shock when you came over? Because he came over as an adult. And he said, Canadians pretend like they're nice. And I was like, what do you mean? What are you saying? We're nice. And he's like, you're not saying what you actually mean. You're not sharing what you actually want to ask. And I think sometimes for folks who are new to Canada, this can be strange. This can be off-putting. It can be, well, they were super friendly to me, so obviously that makes them a friend. And in Canada, that just makes you an acquaintance. That can just, how standard operating procedure. And it's only with your really close friends do you let all of that kind of guard down or all of that, niceness, and you say, those true thoughts or those true criticisms or that true vulnerability. Um, I think also exploring different cultural values through friendship, through platonic relationships, opens up your world to cultural competence and allows you to explore things about different ways that friendship can exist. I remember years ago, so my background is I have a degree in anthropology and gender studies. So I was learning about different ways that men form friendships across the world because I loved cultural anthropology. And there was this image of men in Turkey holding hands. And it was an older photograph, but it talked about how this is not something that you'd see in a lot of other cultures, just friends holding hands, like grown men holding hands as a form of friendship and being close. And it was the first time where I, really considered the different representations of the standard practices of friendship and how it doesn't have to look the same to everybody. My best friend came over the other night and she fell asleep on my couch. I felt honored. I felt honored that she felt safe enough that, life is crazy, life is hard. It was 10 o'clock at night. She was tired. We were just watching TV and she fell asleep. She woke up. She was like, was I snoring? I was like, only, you did heavy breathing. It's okay. Just a little bit. Um, so there's different ways, and being open to that kind of friendship is so important. Really quick, I want to touch on gender and friendship because, again, for newcomer students, international students, sometimes gender can be a barrier to friendship. Sometimes gender is still so attached to stereotypes of how friendships can be. Now, I think, Gen Z, what would even be beyond Gen Z? Gen A? Are we going back to A again? Anyways, Alpha, you know, younger folks are beginning to understand that gender really is a form of expression and not a strict, um, measure of adherence, right? Just because women and as I was writing this with Bella, I was like, we are so skewing this towards women. How can you tell we work in gender-based violence? And we, spend our days working and talking to women and about keeping them safe and things like that. But stereotypically, women are more intimate and outwardly caring. We practice a lot more communication around personal topics and emotions. And, sometimes in friendships, Bella echoed that, we have to be recognizing of some of the challenges that women can face, and is that there's can be a comparison. Whereas sometimes for men, there can be sometimes a competition. Their communication styles might be a little bit more simple. They might not go as deep. They might be more humor based. And their experiences of friendship usually are centered more around, events, occasions, functions, things like that. Um, or specific hobbies. Um, and then I think it's also important to recognize that, gender fluid, non-binary folks exist in the world and that they, on one aspect get to reinvent, or they can pick and choose. They get to decide which is, the truest expression of themselves, and then how they use that expression to then relate to their friendships and the people in their lives. So, yes, gender can impact friendships. And I think one of the things that it can impact is the concept of the friend zone. And I'm going to end with this consideration because I see now that it's 12:50. If anybody wants to reach out to me, if you want to, oh, that was my corgi in the background. If anybody wants to reach out to me, if you want to talk more about this, or if you want to learn more about the work that we do at the DRCC and the work that we do with students, please feel free to reach out to me. But the friend zone is, oh, I hate the term so much. I want to reclaim it. I want to take it back because we should aspire to be in the friend zone. The friend zone is everything that we want it to be. And then if someone wants to have a romantic relationship, then you have to leave the friend zone. So it's a mutual decision, but the friend zone is where I, want to pick from. I would much rather have a relationship that started as a friendship first than than, you know, any which way. There's also the expression friends with benefits. And I don't know if anyone has tried online dating before, but when someone hits you with that, I am just like, do you understand that I would like die for my friends? Like this is what you're asking for right now. You want friends with benefits. You do not want friends with benefits. You just want benefits. That's it. So we need to rethink how we're using the word friend because I want a huge friend zone. I want all my friends in the zone. And then, if romance should happen, then we will kindly exit that zone and pick another one together. But yeah, maybe someone has another thought about it and wants to offer insight because I'm open. I like hearing other people's thoughts and ideas. But thank you all so much for giving me the time to speak today. And yeah, thank you, Aman and Taryn, for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma. That was an amazing presentation. I think you covered so many important key points. And, as like a post-second, I'm a graduate student at the University of Toronto. I think it's so helpful just to also hear this information from someone else. Like sometimes like as students, we know this, like this information exists or we know it, right? But it's like we forget it, right? When you're in that situation or when you're going through something. So
Absolutely. It's the
yeah,
difference between being organic and deliberate, right? Like,
yeah, totally. And so I think it's just so nice and so refreshing to see and hear from another person and a different perspective and really just to gain some insight. So
yay.
thank you. Yeah. I just want to remind everyone that if you do have any questions to please go ahead and ask in our Q&A and I can just go over all the questions that we have. So let me just take a look. So
Or, or
Emma,
if anyone wants to share any stories about their friendships, that's fun too.
yeah,
We can
totally
learn
like an
from
open
each
discussion.
other.
Yeah. So a question is, I know we covered a lot. So could you provide some examples of how platonic friendships can really enhance a student's overall well-being and their academic performance?
I mean, sure, yeah. I mean, let's think of a really practical example. You have a friend in class. Maybe you're sick one day, the friend tells you what happens in class. Like that's very, very basic. And not only, yes, they might get your notes, they might get your slides, whatever, but the friend is going to give them context, right? The friend is going to talk to them about, what they thought of the lecture, how they felt that it connected to the other materials, how they thought that, it connected to other ideas that they had. A friend is going to give that to them more than just slides on a slideshow or a recording. A friend is going to be able to just give them a more in-depth, comprehensive way of studying the material, of learning, right? Because it's going to make connections, in their brain and in their own neural pathways that are then only going to enhance the other person who was sick that day.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a practical example, but
Thank you for sharing. And another question we have is, what is your experience supporting those who want to make friends on satellite campuses that are smaller and don't have as many events, sports teams, etc.?
yeah, that is hard. I mean, when in doubt, organize yourself. Right? Like if you are, let's say you're a professor, you're someone who's in admin on campus and it's a satellite campus, talk to them about, hey, usually on Thursdays in the afternoon, a group of students meet at this coffee shop around the corner. Maybe it's just to work on something, maybe it's to chat about something, but like in those ways, you can take something that might be happening organically and make it a practical way for students to connect. Like when I was at Trent and Durham, I found what I considered my secret space. And it was like this little abandoned cafeteria above a classroom that you kind of had to go down a weird hall to get to. And I was like, this is great. No one's going to be here. No one's going to bug me. I'm going to be alone. The chairs are uncomfortable. It's perfect. And then slowly but surely over the course of my 4 years, I don't know if I put it out into the ether or I invited people and the word just got out, but people slowly started coming into that space. And so while that happened organically, we can also, and things will happen organically. Um, I also think about, making sure that students know that sometimes if a classroom is empty, that can be a space where they can use. I don't I don't want to upset any administrators about classes or any classroom spaces, environments. But like if a classroom is empty and you want to meet with your friends or you want to, work on a project, why not make use? Why not make use of that space?
Totally, yeah. And another question is, how can students approach the situation when a platonic friendship starts to feel imbalanced or unhealthy?
Yeah, say it.
Yeah,
Say it.
yeah. And
Say it.
I think a good point you also brought up was the boundaries, right? Like placing those boundaries and thinking about whether, it's a rule or or if it's a boundary.
Yeah. Is it a rule that I'm placing on someone else? Like, I think the example of alcohol was great. Like you can't drink alcohol. Well, first of all, you can't force anyone to do any, right? Or is it a limit? I will not be in situations where alcohol is involved. That is a boundary that I have, right? So, yeah, for folks where, the relationship dynamic might be moving away from platonic, it is so, so, so important to talk about it. I have been wanting to do a webinar about empowered sexual practices and empowered sexual pleasure as a form of violence prevention for a long time, and I just never find the time to do it. But being able to talk about these things is so important, especially if maybe these feelings are happening on both sides and you're not sure how or if you want it to transition. Talking about it, talking about the fears, talking about the thoughts is so, so important, before sex happens or before relationships change.
And then also, could you please explain how an individual can navigate through friendships when that individual might have social anxiety that might have stemmed from like the COVID pandemic?
Yes. Again, I think openness is huge. It takes a second to be brave and say, I've got anxiety or general anxiety disorder, or, whatever it might be. Being able to be brave enough to say something, even writing it down, even sending a text about it, right? Can invite that other person who might not have that second of bravery in them that day to then share empathy, share compassion. Um, I find that if you mess up and you own it, so I'm using a different example. I used to work with children and I used to do literacy, and I would at times deliberately, when I was reading the book, mess up. I would mispronounce a word or I would correct myself when I was reading or something like that. Because whether or not they tangibly knew, whether or not they knew, I wanted them to see an example of an adult making a mistake and it being okay, so that they knew that they could make a mistake. So when someone, is feeling anxious about creating new friendships, sometimes it is okay to say, I'd like to be your friend. I'd like to get to know you better. I think you're really interesting. I think we have something in common. And, taking that 1 second to be brave can then invite that other person to know that it's okay. You're welcoming them into your vulnerable space, and you're also aware that that's what you're doing, right? Because the more that we're aware of what we're doing, the more empowered that we'll feel. So I'm going to take a step into vulnerability and invite you into that space with me. And that's, where great friendships can happen, and connection and all of that good stuff.
Thank you so much, Emma. So that's all the questions we have for now. But yeah, I would like to thank you so much for, coming on and sharing this information. Like I said, it was so insightful and it was great. It was amazing. So I just like to remind the audience, well, I like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon as well. Um, but I would like to also remind everyone that the webinar will be up and posted this evening, if not early tomorrow morning. And Emma said that she will be able to also share the slides. So you can find that on our website. I encourage everyone to check out our website, campusmentalhealth.ca and morefeetontheground.ca. And then just another friendly reminder to please complete the post-webinar survey. And we do have another upcoming webinar, which will be on understanding ADHD on campus, which will be hosted on April 24th. So you can find that on our campus mental health website as well. And I note that and just shared the link in the chat. So yeah, thank you to the audience and thank you so much, Emma, for joining us today and presenting.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.